recommended, everybody's got the premier or pick engine builder that you choose for your, for your car and such, so. Like I know Rick Clark's got a great, I think you still run Baldwin's?
Yeah, employers.
Yep, employers, I mean, been great engines for you, correct? And Tony, what are you running?
Depends his or my own.
Right. So, I mean, performance, and Brent will agree, there's a lot of top-notch engines out there, but the one thing we wanted to collectively put together was every reputable engine builder, there's certain things that they're gonna tell you that you just don't do to an engine, correct?
Yeah.
Or
Basically, we
should.
talked back and forth about fuel, spark, oil changes, talked about octane rating, maintenance, what else did we have in there? External versus internal balance stuff.
Correct, proper flex plate choice. The other thing was cam buttons, torque converter spacers.
Yep.
To isolate your
Yeah,
parts.
basically, we wanted to talk to people about, once you get your engine in your hands, regardless of who your engine builder is, once it leaves them, then it's you guys' responsibility to pretty much take care of that thing. So you really need to be in contact with that engine builder and understand what your engine is. So over the years, we've ran into multiple different little silly things that happen that people don't even think about, okay? So one of the things that Casey just mentioned was a cam button. A lot of engine builders out there building four-roller camshafts. 90% of them are probably going to have a cam button behind that time code, okay? You guys that are running full cradle classes, and it's hard to try to get that front head plate on, do you guys take your water pumps off, put the cradle on, then put your water pump back on, or how do you go about doing that? Most commonly you have to.
Yes.
All right, well, I ran into a situation where on the water pumps that I run, not only does it have a cam button, but I also have a cam button stop. So it's threaded into the lower portion of the water pump. And I typically set a small air gap in there. I had a couple of guys that were swapping their water pumps from one engine to the next because they were running multiple shows and they got to take their cradles on and off. Well, I had one really bad situation where one water pump made it from one engine to the other engine with a different cradle, and by the time he got it all bolted together, he had jammed that stop right into the cam button and didn't realize it. Got the impact out, everybody's in a hurry, ran that thing tight. That engine didn't last very long. It broke the cam button right off the front of the camshaft, got wedged into the time chain of the sprocket, then a bunch of valves. It made a mess. And I didn't know what had happened to it until I got it back. Of course, now it was all shrapnel. So as we went through and inspected and diagnosed everything, that's when we figured out what was going on. I saw that dent, I kind of figured it out, called him. He said, yes, this is what we do every time. So now that we've gotten that straight, it's knowledge. Now it's knowledge. Now they know, okay, I gotta make sure that that water pump stays on this engine, or at least if I'm swapping them around, look at that cam button stop to make sure you don't have it jammed tight in this front cover. Flex plates and front dampers. Some engines are externally balanced, some engines are internally balanced, some engines are external in the rear, internal in the front. What that means is the damper may or may not be offset weighted, the flex plate may or may not be offset weighted, okay? You have to make sure you know what your engine is. Anytime you destroy a flex plate, bend a flex plate, break the damper off the crankshaft, whatever the case may be, you have to put the correct one back on. We've had some situations over the years where guys are pulling engines from this car to that car to this car to that car, and before you know it, we boogered up a flex plate, but we have one over here, this is our backup, they grab it and they bolt it on. If that was an internally balanced engine and you bolted an externally balanced flywheel on it, not only is it going to shake like crazy, but it's going to take the main bearings out of it very, very quickly.
They do shake.
They do shake.
How do I know that? I had some helpers that were swapping some stuff off my engine, which is a 383 that Brent built, and they were just swapping a tranny out. Chance had ran it in South Carolina and had a busted tranny, and they threw it in the car and everything was good. I fired it up. As soon as I lit it up, I'm like, whoa, something's wrong here, So I shut it off and I'm scratching my head. I'm like, okay. So I asked Chance, I said, hey, what flex plate did you guys use? Did you change it? And they said, yeah, that one had a chipped tooth on it, so we threw the other one on it. I said, where did you get it? He says, what's one in the box truck, that brand new TCI? I said, that's for an internally balanced engine. you know, he had somebody helping him and he said, hey, go get this flex plate, you know, and
Those things happen. They
If-
absolutely happen.
if you don't know the difference between them visually, it's pretty easy.
Absolutely. Yeah, anytime you're gonna have an externally balanced, it's gonna end up, the damper itself will be offset. It'll have a weight, something to show that it's not internally balanced. Same thing with the flex plates. They're gonna have a weight well to them. We talked a lot about timing, he and I. The timing by ear thing, you can't do that. Don't do that. Ignition timing is so very important in your engine to make it run properly, perform properly. I know years ago, the old trick was I leave my distributor loose. When it gets super hot, I can reach out there and back the timing off, get it fired back up, and crank timing back to it. We've all done it. I've seen 100 people do it. The downside is that engine is gonna take on a lot of abuse, a lot of abuse. Retarded ignition timing and advanced ignition timing both can create problems. The proper timing is where it needs to be. Wherever your engine builder decides that is, find out that information from that person. Where should my timing be? And check it. Check it. You would be surprised how often the distributor gets hit. You guys are breaking distributor caps clear off of them, don't even think twice. You just put a new cap on, hey, everything's great. Well, if that distributor cap got hit hard enough to knock it clear off of there, chances are good it probably moved the distributor too.
Is it possible to time an engine without a timing tab?
Not here.
You got some.
Yeah, the whole idea is, obviously, if we have too much ignition timing in the engine, it's gonna create detonation right? And you're gonna destroy the business. It's gonna create all kind of combustion temperatures, and you're gonna get hot. Same thing if we have our timing backed off too much. Now the flame travel is actually too slow, so we're building up too much combustion temperature. What else?
Talking about proper
Yes. The ultra bells, anything that's running a rear cradle, okay? I've ran into quite a few problems where guys get their engine from me, they run home, they got this guy's cradle, they got this guy's ultra bell, they're running a crank, the torque converter spacer, and it's this thick, or this one's that thick, and so on and so forth. You gotta be really, really careful, and even if it's just a stock bell housing, stock transmission, we gotta make sure that that torque converter is not putting pressure on the crankshaft. The torque converter should center itself on the back of the crankshaft on the snout, but there should be no pressure. There should actually be a little bit of play, where when you draw the torque converter tight against the flex plate, now everything's centered. It pulled it out of the front pump, so you're not driving into the back of that front pump in the transmission. And we're also not forcing the crankshaft forward. I've had a couple of engines where guys are, again, pop their cradles off, put it on another engine, putting the same transmission on, okay, which crank spacer do I use, this one looks good, they jam it on there and tighten everything down. Now there's absolutely no free play or end play for the crankshaft. So it's got the main thrust bearing jammed right up against the backside of the crank. We already have a major friction problem right there. Now you guys go out there in the pit and start hitting, and it just absolutely destroys the thrust bearings on the crankshaft. So you gotta really watch that spacing. Keep track of that kind of stuff.
You talked about things that cause your engine to insulate heat, such as dirt.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, you gotta keep them clean, folks. You gotta keep them clean. I know it's really, really tough to do throughout the season, and obviously we race in a muddy environment. I get it. But the more dirt that gets on that engine, on the cast iron parts of it, on the aluminum parts of it, the more that is insulation for it to continue to build heat. Keep that thing clean. Let the pores in the cast iron and the aluminum breathe. The more dirt and the more muck that gets stuck to it, the more it's going to insulate that engine. It's going to keep getting hotter and hotter and hotter. You have to keep them clean. Keep them rinsed off. Keep all your wires cleaned off. Keep your carburetors cleaned out. Carburation, we talked about fuel.
Yep.
I've seen it being pretty common here, and I don't know why. For the last couple of years, guys are over-fueling quite a bit. They get engines back, and there's an awful lot of over-fuel condition going on. You have to make sure that you jet your carburetors correctly. Extra fuel is not building you any more power. Extra fuel is not going to make that engine run any cooler. okay? It is gonna create all kinds of problems inside the combustion chamber. So typically, let's just throw some numbers out there. An out-of-the-box 4412 Holley carburetor, which is probably a very common carburetor for 90% of the free world out there, Derby. I don't care if you're bolting that on top of a 302 cubic inch engine, all the way up to a 415 cubic inch engine. Chances are the jetting range in that thing out of the box is going to be right around 73 to 77. If you're running 84 jets in it, you're entirely too rich on fuel. Entirely too rich on fuel. So kind of keep that in mind. The types of fuel that you guys are running in your octane ratings, you can't run an octane fuel that the engine is not designed to have and build any more power. If you have an engine that's 9.5 to 1 compression ratio and you're trying to run 114 octane fuel in it, you're not building any more power. In fact, you're actually losing power. That octane rating is based on what compression that engine is being built on. That's why those ratings are there. Now, you try to burn the higher octane fuel, the engine can't actually burn it because it doesn't have the compression ratio to do it, and now we also have a jet carburetor. You're really asking for problems. The engine's not going to run very well.
Does higher octane fuels have any kind of effect when your cylinder temperatures increase as far as pre-ignitioning?
They do. The higher octane fuel will absolutely help when the engine gets hot, especially super hot. We start losing water, we completely dump the radiator out, we're out there for another half an hour, and combustion temperatures are getting super, super hot. The higher octane rating at that point will help you. And most commonly, I'm glad you said that, guys will make the comment that, boy, the hotter it got, the better it ran. Well, that's because you already had the higher octane fuel that you shouldn't have. So when it was cool, it wasn't burning it. And then when you got the engine super, super hot, now it can actually burn that octane. So the engine actually acts like it runs better. Yeah, good point. What else did we talk about?
I think that was the biggies, was just the octane rating, the fuel, and then spark plug choice versus the correct plugs and what you don't do with spark plugs.
Yeah, one of the big thing is find out what spark plugs your engine builder recommends and stick to them. The heat range on your spark plugs are very, very important. The design of the spark plug is very important. You know, get online and do a Google search on different types of spark plugs. There are so many out there. And the actual ground strap and the electrode is very important for the cylinder head that you're running and how far it protrudes into the actual combustion chamber. So whatever spark plug your engine builder recommends, stick with that spark plug. If you run down to your local auto parts store and they don't have it, and the guy that's standing on the other side of the counter says, we don't have those, but here's the one that's cross-referenced to it. No. No. Run the spark plug that your engine builder recommended you run. So buy a couple extra sets so you have them, so that you don't have to do that quick parts store run. This right here is a perfect example. The hotter that spark plug gets, the hotter that combustion temperature is going to be. So whatever your given engine builder is, they have picked the correct range that they want you to run for the type of fuel that they expect you to run. So of course, there again too, if that engine was originally built to run on fuel and you decide that you're going to switch it over to alcohol, you better get a hold of that engine builder and let that person know that you're switching to alcohol because a few things are going to change. Number one's going to be a spark plug, for sure.
So if I decide I want more spark, I get a hotter plug.
That's not exactly how it works.
But I think that's, a lot of times people have that conception.
That is the idea that they have in their head, that a hotter spark plug means I'm gonna get more spark. That's not at all how it works. That's not at all how it works. So stick with the spark plug that your engine builder recommended.
I think that's about all we had on the list, actually.
That's good. Sounds good. That was gonna be quick and simple and just something to keep in mind as far as once you guys get your engines from your builder.
Is there any specific questions anybody had to ask or would like to know anything, general stuff?
Solid roller valve train, how often should you set valves? Once a year?
Once a year.
Or like in Derby,
Solid roller, I would recommend checking it every run. Absolutely.
I'm not around the maintenance department having
The maintenance of your engines are so very, very important, for not just the performance of it, but for a diagnostic tool.
I know one thing in the racing world, when we ran solid tap, is because of how your valve springs could change
Yes.
so much. You'd see, depending upon valve spring choice, like in our late model, we had some weekends, depending upon how hard it was ran and how long the runs were on them springs, changed where them things were when we checked them. Some you could throw a cat through there some weeks.
Yeah. Valve lash is very, very important on a solid lift, and especially with an engine that takes on heat and cools down. It takes on a lot of heat and cools down. There's so much expansion and contraction going on. You have to keep track of that valve train. If you get a valve that's starting to tighten the lash up on it and it starts hanging open, it's going to burn it. It's going to burn it. And of course, it's going to burn it when you don't want it to. You're out there, you're down to 3 cars, I got this, and it burns the valve and the engine goes sour, and there you sit. So anything like that, yeah, absolutely. I recommend checking that every run.
Especially if you get it hot.
Especially if you get hot. We talked about oil changes. I recommend to my folks, change your oil every run. I do have some people that kind of they have their own theory and their own maintenance schedule, but I recommend changing that oil every run and change the filter every run. If you look at your oil and look at your filters, it's going to give you some diagnostic ideas of what's going on inside it. It's a lot easier to catch a problem before it becomes a major problem, and it's also a lot cheaper to fix.
It's just there to change your oil.
The longer you run that engine, the more it actually hurts the internal portions of it when you heat it up, cool it down, heat it up, cool it down. So if you catch something early on, then it's a lot easier to fix that problem at that point and a lot cheaper. Zinc. Do not run Walmart brand oil. Don't run anything off the shelf at Napa, at Advanced Auto Parts, none of that stuff. It doesn't matter if you have a 100% fully rollarized valve train, you still need zinc in your oil. The feds have pulled all of the zinc out of our oil, so anything that is at the parts store sitting on that counter, I guarantee you does not have zinc in it because they are not allowed to sell it. They can sell it to you, but they cannot have it sitting out on display on the rack. So if you ask the counter guy, hey, I need some high zinc oil, you have some? Yes, we do. We have a couple cases in the back. We're not allowed to advertise it. They can sell it, but they cannot sell it to you out there on the rack. So make sure you're running some type of a high quality, high zinc oil. That zinc doesn't help just the valve train for a flat tap camshaft. It also helps every other internal component that has metal on metal contact. Valve guides, the piston rings, the skirts on the pistons, the cylinders. We need that zinc in there. There's Brad Penn grade out there, there's VR1, there's hundreds of different oil companies out there that are building good, high quality, high zinc oil. Joe Gibbs' driven stuff is fantastic. It's a really, really good oil. So make sure you get that zinc.
Or you can use the additive, correct?
You can use the
Which
additive.
helps.
It helps. I myself do. I mix it in, even with my zinc oils I do. I'm not real sure, and I'm not too big of a believer of how well I get it mixed. That's the trouble with me, as far as I don't know whether the additive I can justify that actually I'm getting in there. So a lot of times I'll dump like a half a bottle of the zinc additive into a half a quart of oil and shake it all up before ever dumping in the engine. Instead of dumping all the engine into the oil and then putting the zinc in, I don't know that actually ever gets mixed together. So I try to mix it in a container all by itself before I even pour it in there.
What about Lucas?
Lucas is pretty good stuff. It's more of a stabilizer than anything else, but Lucas it's definitely worth it. It's a good additive for your oil, again, just to stabilize it, and especially as hot as you guys get. I mean, I know everybody here has gotten an engine hot at one point or another, and you kind of think, boy, I really had that thing hot. But if you've never tore one apart that was really hot, then you just can't fathom how hot the inside of that thing is. I have had connecting rods at multiple engines that ran for hour-long features and lost their water, and it was completely dry, and they just kept going, and that connecting rod is as blue as your sweatshirt. I mean, they look like the pipes on a Harley. That's how hot that stuff gets inside.
You think you, like, say if you're using the Brad Penn oil, you put shakers in with that, or is the Brad Penn good enough by itself?
The Brad Penn has high enough quality zinc that you can run it pretty much straight out of the bottle. Again, when it comes to the oils and stuff, jump online. You'd be surprised how much information is out there. Now you have to search for it, but you can find it. And it's all about the parts per million of zinc. I mean, that's kind of how they do it. It's kind of like a paint mixing measurement. It's parts per million per unit. So you can compare the Valvoline VR1, you can compare the Joe Gibbs driven oil, you can compare the Brad Penn, which is now Penn grade, is what they call it. But the parts per million for the Penn grade stuff, it's pretty high. It's pretty high there.
What filter would you recommend pairing with that?
Depending on your engine, whether it's Ford, Chevy, whatever. Right now, Wicks are probably about the highest quality off-the-shelf filter that I've found. Their black racing series is what they call them. So regardless of whether you're running a Ford or a Chevy or an Oldsmobile or an LS or whatever you're running for an engine, the black racing series Wicks filters, if you cut one apart, brand new, without it even having any oil run through it, and look at the construction of them and the paper element, they're quite a bit higher quality than even the Frams are. For a long time, everybody was running the Frams HP series racing filters, and they're a good filter. The canister's real strong, the burst rate's real high, the elastometer ring in them is real strong, but their paper cartridge is starting to get pretty low quality now. So it's not that I want to take away from them, but just by my own analysis, cutting the filters apart and looking at them, the Wicks seem to be, they're pretty good stuff.
And one thing to keep in mind in today's world that we're all in right now, parts manufacturers, not by choice, not everything's what it used to be. I mean, and that's in every industry. So, make sure if there's a new best thing out there, make sure you check with your engine builder and ask him what he recommends, because, there is some filter shortages currently. I don't think it's hit some of this stuff yet, but
Yeah, there's definitely a filter problem, and as you said, right now everything's a compromise. That's the hard part for an engine builder, is the parts quality is not quite as good as it used to be. So you really got to search. Oil's not as good as it used to be. The filters aren't as good as it used to be. Everything's a compromise in industry right now because they're all struggling to try to get product out the door.
cheapest.
And they're trying to get it as cheap as possible.
They're just trying to pack boxes.
Yeah. So definitely, like Casey's saying, stay in contact with your engine builder. If you're gonna make any kind of a change whatsoever, contact that person. Get their idea and their advice of what they would have you do. Anything else? We got all kind of time to talk.
On the small block Chevrolets, you pull out the bypass in the oil filter, like the little nipple, and change it out for a straight, or you leave bypass in it.
Well, that's a 50-50.
I was gonna say, I've ran them with small blocks and race cars, and sometimes they worked out okay, and then sometimes you just kept blowing the seal out on filters.
That's a 50-50.
Number one rule is dirty oil is better than no oil. Is that what they say?
Yeah.
So if it's somebody that I feel confident is going to actually change their oil every run like I recommend and change their filter every run like I recommend, if they're going to put themselves on a maintenance schedule like they should actually have, then I will eliminate the bypass altogether. If I don't get that feeling, then I don't eliminate the bypass for just that very reason. I would rather have some dirty oil going back through there than no. So again, the O-ring situation, you said you were getting rid of your bypass and it was blowing the elastometer rings out.
Yeah.
Same type situation. Fram and Wicks have probably the best elastometer rings out there. The crush rate on them is extremely high. So if you have an engine that has a lot of oil pressure and you're having problems blowing those rings out, go to the Wicks Black Racing or Fram Racing. Crank them things on there, you'll blow the canister apart before that O-ring will come out. Yeah, that's a good point.
Found it. I've been off my game this weekend. I'm just gonna be honest with
You
you.
got a lot going
I'm on a
on.
train wreck.
You got a lot going on. Anything else?
Do they still recommend that high pressure oil pump? Is that even?
Pressure, no.
Cause
High
a lot of, not so much maybe Derby World, but years ago when you run street stocks or a Claimer engine, they said a high pressure oil pump could drain your pan on a long straightaway.
And that is true.
Drive.
For a long, let's just call it race track application, the engine's at a higher end for a long extended period of time, yes. High volume, high pressure can absolutely pull the pan back. There isn't enough for
Right.
I don't like to run a lot of high pressure pumps, but I do definitely run high volumes. My theory behind the volume is when it takes on heat. When that engine gets super, super hot, and you're basically using the oil as its own coolant because there's no water left in the radiator, so it's dissipating all the heat of that oil. Even though you're running the heavy oil and you got this and you got the zinc and we got additives, we threw Lucas in it, we got all this stuff. When that thing is that hot, if you were to drain the oil out of it, it runs out of there, it is broken down thin as water. So at that point, the oil pump struggles to keep the pressure up because the oil's gotten so thin. So if we have a lot of volume there with the pump, when that oil gets super hot, that's kind of like a little bit of a protection.
EVAC, is it worth putting the tubes on the headers and all that, or not worth it?
Depending on the engine. I like to put EVACs on all mine, and there's reasons for it. The EVACs are helping to get the crankcase pressure out of there, of course that's what they're for. But they also help the ring seal, which is what a lot of folks don't think about. The crankcase builds all that pressure, well they already have atmospheric pressure pushing down on them to begin with, so the rings are fighting against two different problems. Especially when the engine takes on all kinds of heat. So if we can help those rings out when it gets super, super hot, at least a little bit, let's do that. And the EVACs do. They help get some of that crankcase pressure out of there so the rings aren't fighting them both. We're still fighting atmospheric pressure no matter what, but at least we're trying to get rid of that crankcase pressure. Now an engine that's not going to run real hot, if you're on an alcohol motor and runs cool all the time, the EVACs are not doing a whole lot for you.
What about the squirters on the pistons? I heard good and bad about the oil squirters.
Pin oilers, an actual oil pressure pumped squirter in a wet sump is very, very difficult to justify in my opinion. No matter how you go about it in a wet sump system, you're robbing Peter to pay Paul. In a dry sump, it's a completely different world. Pin oilers were designed years ago for dry sump engines because their engine is under crankcase evacuation all the time. And then the oil is getting pulled out of the crankcase, so the actual crankcase is under a vacuum, so splash oil isn't there because there isn't any. It's a dry sump. So pin oilers and squirters were designed for that application, so they could keep those wrist pins, keep cylinder walls lubricated. In our wet sump engines, we already have so much splash oil flying around in there that it's not really that beneficial to put a squirter in it. And when we do put a squirter in it, now we're robbing from all the other oil galleys that were designed in that block for the squirters to have oil. So I've pulled quite a few engines down that did have squirters in them. Quality work, it was quality work, and almost every one of those engines that I've pulled apart, the main bearings and the rod bearings took the abuse. They were getting starved of oil because the squirters were taken.
I think one of the things that happens with that is the drive system, wet sump versus dry sump.
Oh, yeah.
Is significantly different because you're relying on connected components to drive a wet sump versus a direct drive oil pump and two-stage or so on and so forth.
Exactly. Absolutely true.
We could figure out how to put them through our bell housings on a derby cart, it'd be sweet.
I do kind of design my own pin oilers so that the wrist pins do get additional oil, and so do the pistons for the most part. But as far as an oil pressure fed squirter in a wet sump, I don't put them in any of my headers. And I've never had a main bearing or a rod bearing problem, and I've never had a wrist pin problem. And I've had quite a few of them hot, real hot.
What's your opinion on coated valves, pistons?
Coatings, good topic. Good topic. Coatings are beneficial in the right place. Okay, so when we start talking about thermal barrier coatings, we've got to be very, very careful because again, once again, we're talking about a wet sump engine. So everything that's inside that engine, to include the oil, isn't going anywhere. It's staying in there. Dry sump systems, the oil evacs out of it, can go through a cooler, gets the opportunity to go back to a tank, comes back through the pump, goes into the engine. Even some of the wet sumps that you guys are running coolers on, the oil gets the opportunity to get out and come back. But if we have a thermal barrier coating, then that means that that coating is deflecting the heat off of it and transferring it someplace else. Well, it has to go somewhere. So the next weak link in line absorbs that heat. What I found with engines that have a lot of thermal coatings on them is the oil instantly takes on that heat. It will destroy the oil in a very, very short amount of time. Because the heat is getting deflected off of everything else. Nothing can absorb the heat, so it immediately attacks the cooling system right off the bat. The engines will get pretty warm actually and start to steam, and then it attacks your engine oil and tries to dissipate that heat. So it just destroys the engine oil quickly too. Coatings are really, really good for friction surfaces. So I like to see coatings on the skirts of our pistons, absolutely. Barrier coatings on the face of the piston, not so much. Same thing with the valves. So if they're in the right place, yes. Bearings, like to see them coated. That oil temperature is going to get super high. And to protect that babbitt from melting, coatings on a bearing is definitely a good idea. Again, internal engine temperatures and that oil temperature, it's pretty crazy how hot that stuff really gets. You know, everybody wants to say how hot, how hot. Bearing babbitt material, just non-coated, will melt down at about 300 degrees, 320-ish, okay? I've pulled engines apart before that the cam bearing babbitt had melted completely off of it and looked like a puddle of solder in the bottom of the oil pan. Just this one big lump. Made it look like solder. And that was all the babbitt that melted off the bearings. That's how hot that oil was. It was hot enough to get oil. So coated bearings, yes. Absolutely. Anything else?
As an engine builder, you said, what approach the timing your engine builder recommends? How do you come up with that number? Or
No, the ignition time itself is typically going to be based off of the fuel that it's going to run, the quality of cylinder head that's on it, what that head can flow, compression ratio, things like that. So, you know, rule of thumb, if you just want to throw it out there, is the better the head, the less timing needed. That's kind of the way it works.
because you know, years going way back, when you still had vacuum in pants, plug it, set it at like 8 degrees, and then hook everything back up, you're ready to go.
Yeah, and some builders may want you to run in advance, some builders lock their distributors and not running any advance. Some run just mechanical, some run mechanical and vacuum. You know, there's a lot of different theories that are out there. So that's why it's so important to know what it's supposed to be.
Yeah.
You know, if your engine builder is telling you, set your timing at 32 degrees, okay. Do I have advance in my distributor, not advance my distributor? When does the advance come in? When does it not come in? Where do I set it at?
Yeah, because you know, you could put like medium weights in and medium springs,
Sure.
lock your thing, and then set 32. That's what I'm saying. How do you come up with 32 versus 34 versus?
Right. Yeah, that's all gonna be based on when the engine's being built. Camshaft design, compression ratio, cylinder head chosen, things like that. Well, nobody's fell completely asleep yet. That's good.
And what do you, in your opinion, is the best two-barrel?
Uh,
Because there's guys that swear old technology, the 2G,
I
all
like
day
them
long.
all. I like them all. I'll tell you the best two-barrel carburetor or the best carburetor you could ever run is the one that you have to work on the least.
Well, that's true.
That's the best one. That's the best one.
Because it's just like
So-
everyone has, they say they sell 10 Rochesters for every 2 Hollies. This guy says, oh, I wouldn't even touch a Rochester. You know, I mean, it's everyone's opinion, but what do you think?
I've worked with both of them, and, you know, the 2G has its place, the 4412 has its place. They're both a fantastic carburetor. So again, in my opinion, the best carburetor is the one that you have to work on the least, or the easiest. Okay, so if we do a quick comparison, I'm sure everybody's gotten a chunk of dirt at some point or another stuck in the needle and seat of a carburetor, and it's flooding fuel everywhere, and it's a nightmare. Oh my God, and here we are, and we gotta get going, and they're calling us up for the future, and we still got a weld on the car, now we got fuel everywhere. Okay, so with all that said, in order for you to get the needle and seat out of a 2G, you gotta tear the entire top of the carburetor off, right? Chances are good, you're probably gonna ruin that gasket.
But you put more dirt in it than you did.
So, with the 4412, you can get the needle and seat out and clean it up real quick. Don't even have to take the fuel bowl off. So for just that quick little comparison, the 4412 is easier to work on. Performance-wise, I don't have a preference. Both perform well.
I'll tell you, I mean, just in case everybody don't know it, on our website, on the events tab, there's a schedule for today for the seminars. Jason Koch will be doing a seminar too on
yes.
fueling. And, you know, Brent's great with carburetors. I mean, that's who puts them on our engine. But I will say, in my opinion, Jason Koch's one of the most knowledgeable carburetor guys in the
Yeah,
world.
definitely sit through that seminar and ask any kind of questions.
Yeah, so, I mean, he can elaborate, like, if you want the technical stuff on carbs, or even the, like, for me, carburetors, it either works, if it don't work, I'm like, hey, dude, this thing is doing this, and he's like, well, do this, I'm like, nope, not me. I'll change it, but I'm not tearing it apart. Mainly because I can't see most of that stuff in there now. But that will be upcoming here at 3 o'clock to 3:30, so, I mean, and last year, he, I guess, blew everybody's dress up for say, as far as information, it was pretty good, so.
Yeah, I sat through it last year, it was great, it was really good.
What about a MSD setup, distributor and box?
Boxes I like. Boxes I like. Actually, I really like it for rev limiter, things like that, you know. With most of my customers, the biggest thing they don't like is wires. What I've learned is most Derby folks don't like wires. They want the least amount of wires in their car as possible. So, but yeah, I would absolutely recommend running an MSD box, sure. Absolutely. If you have the box inside the car, then that gets the module obviously out of the distributor, because that distributor is going to get just as hot as everything else on that engine, and it's very easy to melt the module down. So if you got a box, you don't have to worry about that module.
I'm going new Chevrolet this year. I've always ran Chrysler myself, and the engine builder has an MSD and everything set up on this engine. And
I'd run it, absolutely. Absolutely. We've probably used up way more time than we're supposed to. Anything else? Pick my brain as best you can. All right, well, thank you very much.